Welcome to this explainer. Today we're jumping straight into something that affects literally every single one of us, the intense, internal neurological battle behind self-control and procrastination. You know the famous marshmallow test, right? Kids agonizing over eating one treat right now versus waiting for two later. But have you ever stopped to wonder what's actually happening inside your head during that struggle? Let's unpack the fascinating science of why we put things off, and more importantly, how we can actually rewire our brains to take back control.
So, think about this for a second. Why is it that an incredibly accomplished person, someone who manages a massive team or maybe even performs complex surgeries, will stare at a simple 10-minute email for 3 whole weeks? It's totally baffling. You've probably beat yourself up in these moments, right? Thinking you just lack discipline or you have zero willpower. But I'm here to tell you it isn't just laziness. It's actually a deeply ingrained biological response.
Here's the absolute crucial takeaway you need to remember. Procrastination is an emotional regulation problem. It is not a moral failing. When you're avoiding a hard task, it's just your brain's desperate attempt to regulate unpleasant emotions. The task itself generates this feeling of discomfort, anxiety, or maybe boredom. And your brain, well, it wants immediate relief from that feeling. So you aren't managing your time poorly. You're actually just trying to manage your mood.
And that brings us to a vicious cycle known as the shame loop. You struggle with a task, and then almost immediately you start judging yourself for struggling. You think, why can't I just do this? I'm being so lazy. Well, this self-judgment literally spikes your stress levels. And here's the kicker. That acute stress actively drains the exact executive function skills you need to initiate the task in the first place. Shame is not a motivator, guys. It's a massive tax on your brain's resources.
Let's look under the hood at the hardware driving this. Meet your amygdala and the broader limbic system. This is the ancient, highly emotional core of your brain. It operates on a very simple rule. If it feels bad, avoid it. If it feels good, grab it. It's basically your brain's fast-acting panic button. So whether you're resisting a marshmallow or staring at a dreaded spreadsheet, your amygdala detects a threat to your comfort, sounds the alarm, and pushes you to seek instant relief. But on the other side of this internal battle is your prefrontal cortex. This is the evolutionary newcomer. It's responsible for your logical planning, your long-term goals, rational thought, all of that. This is the sensible, adult voice in your head that knows finishing that spreadsheet is actually pretty important for your career.
So why do we struggle so much? Well, because it's a completely unfair fight. The amygdala's signals travel on a super-fast neural highway. It's been refined by hundreds of millions of years of evolution just to keep us alive. The prefrontal cortex, though, it uses a much slower back road. By the time your logical brain arrives to rationally explain that the spreadsheet isn't actually a tiger trying to eat you, your emotional brain has already forced you to open YouTube and watch cat videos.
We call this phenomenon an amygdala hijack. The emotional brain fires so powerfully and so incredibly fast that it effectively takes the prefrontal cortex totally offline. You aren't consciously deciding to procrastinate. Your amygdala decides for you in a matter of milliseconds. It hijacks your behavior, forcing you away from discomfort and pulling you right toward instant gratification.
If we break down this internal cage match, it looks like this. You have the ventromedial prefrontal cortex driving you toward immediate rewards right now. Then you've got the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex trying to keep you focused on future outcomes. And finally, the amygdala, amplifying the emotional urgency to avoid discomfort immediately. It's a literal pincer movement against your rational brain. And fascinatingly, studies show your brain literally processes your future self as a complete stranger. So when you put off a task, your brain feels like it's assigning that hard work to someone else entirely. No wonder we procrastinate. Section 2. Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. Rewiring Thought Patterns. Let's move on.
So, how do we win this battle? How do we give our prefrontal cortex a fighting chance? Well, that brings us to cognitive behavioral therapy. And this isn't just about talking about your feelings. It's a structured method for literally rewiring your thought patterns and giving your logical brain a megaphone. At the core of this is the CBT triangle, which shows that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are inextricably linked. If you think, I'm never going to finish this huge project, that thought generates a feeling of intense anxiety. That anxiety, driven by the amygdala, leads straight to the behavior of procrastination. To change the behavior, we have to intercept the thought before it spirals.
And we do that through cognitive restructuring, using a really practical framework: catch, check, and change. First, catch. When you feel that sudden urge to avoid a task, pause and identify the automatic negative thought. Second, check. Act like a detective. Ask yourself, is this thought literally 100% true? Where's the evidence? Finally, change. Replace that distorted, paralyzing thought with something accurate and manageable. Like, okay, this is a big project, but I can write just the outline right now.
This entire process heavily relies on Socratic questioning. It helps you explore and evaluate the assumptions affecting your life. By asking yourself open-ended, objective questions, you independently discovered that your fierce self-criticism usually isn't based on actual facts at all. It's just a cognitive distortion. This kind of guided discovery is incredibly powerful. It takes the emotional charge out of a daunting task and allows your prefrontal cortex to regain control.
Once you've challenged the thought, you need a behavioral strategy to bypass that initial amygdala resistance. Enter the 5-minute rule. Just commit to working on the dreaded task for exactly 5 minutes. That's literally it. The amygdala doesn't panic at 5 minutes, it panics at the thought of an all-night grind. More often than not, once you overcome that massive hurdle of just initiating the task, momentum naturally carries you forward.
Section 3. Mindfulness, Structural Remodeling of the Brain. Let's look at the biology.
So CBT helps us manage our thoughts in the moment. But what if we could actually upgrade the physical hardware of the brain? And I'm not just talking about relaxing here, I'm talking about literal structural remodeling of the brain. It is absolutely astonishing, but it only takes 8 weeks of consistent mindfulness-based stress reduction to see physical, measurable changes in your brain's architecture. Just 8 weeks to build a brain that is more resilient to stress and far better at self-control.
And we actually have the proof in functional and structural MRI scans. Mindfulness acts as a biological workout for your brain, inducing actual, measurable gray matter changes. By practicing mindfulness, like simply focusing on your breath and non-judgmentally observing your thoughts, you are actively inducing neuroplasticity.
The impact of this is profound. Mindfulness physically increases the volume of your prefrontal cortex, your logical planner. It increases the hippocampus, helping with memory and learning. And crucially, it decreases the activity of the amygdala. It literally beefs up the logical brain while shrinking the panic button, leading to much better prefrontal inhibition of those emotional avoidant impulses.
Moving into our final section, building your executive function toolkit. Let's wrap this up.
We've talked about rewiring thoughts with CBT and remodeling the brain with mindfulness. Now, let's tie this all together with your foundational toolkit. Because honestly, none of those cognitive strategies will work if your brain doesn't have the basic fuel it needs to operate. Here are the evidence-based lifestyle interventions you absolutely need. First, sleep. It protects your working memory. Next, movement. Aerobic exercise measurably improves your inhibitory control. And finally, a dopamine menu, using small, healthy rewards to spark motivation when you're feeling stuck. These aren't just your standard health tips. These are the biological prerequisites for self-control.
There's a reason experts say sleep is the highest impact foundation, and yet it's the one most adults quietly sacrifice. When you don't sleep, you experience acute stress, and as we now know, acute stress weakens the prefrontal cortex. We really have to stop borrowing against our sleep and calling the resulting lack of focus a character flaw. It's not. It's simply a brain running on empty.
Which brings us to our final thought. For your entire life, your amygdala and prefrontal cortex have been locked in this hidden battle, dictating your habits, your productivity, and your stress levels. But now you can actually see the machinery at work. You have the tools, cognitive restructuring, mindfulness, and foundational care. So the big question is, now that you can see the pattern, how are you going to rewire it? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.